My first reaction was, what a hell of a time to have a bye, because only in Hurricane Ike did they have an exchange bye to week 2. Previously, week 7 in a 16-game schedule was the earliest bye, which I think was 2008 or 10 in that region, and now within a 17-game schedule, you've got the bye in week 6. But not only that, you've got to play the Chargers, you've got to play Russell Wilson's first maiden voyage at Mile High, and you've also got to play the Colts week 1. So you've probably got 3 of the top sort of 5 or 6 AFC contenders in there, and an early bye. So not the kindest of starts from the scheduling gods, shall we say.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that it's 3 of the top AFC contenders. I hadn't actually thought of it that way. I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you because I do think that that's an interesting way to look at it. I kind of more looked at it from a matchup standpoint. And just to say this, first of all, I don't really care how hard the schedule is or how grueling it is. Like that, it did stand out to me that they played 5 games, that they'll play 5 games and then have a bye week. All right, like it stood out, obviously, but it didn't bother me that they're gonna have to play 12 straight games. It's gonna be a much newer team, and you know, I think that we've acknowledged, even though I'm somebody who wants to watch competitive football, I'm not here saying go out there and try to lose every game and get the higher draft pick and have no integrity about the product that you put out there. But I do think we all understand and acknowledge this is sort of a wasteland, that 2022 is sort of you're still in that experimental phase and not really expecting to do much. And so from a team competitive standpoint, it did not really matter to me much what the schedule looked like, especially kind of already knowing what the players, or I'm sorry, who the teams were going to be. But I did want to know. I just wanted to know the order, just out of from a fan, a fan of the game, and maybe planning road trips or where I might want to go and that sort of thing, right? But to the part about the first, section of the schedule or the first 5 games before the bye week, there were a couple of things that I was looking out for, and they're like really sort of specific. And so I'll start with the first 5 games. I thought more than anything, and I know Chicago's defense and Denver's defense are not necessarily as good as they were maybe a year or 2 ago. And especially even if you look at them last year, those weren't great defenses, but Indianapolis, Denver, Chicago, and the Chargers, I think, will have a good defense. So just put that out there. Those are 4 teams that I would expect normally to have a good defense. Like, you know what I mean? If that makes sense, like going into it. So I'm like, oh, what a cool start to the season, kind of like test for Davis Mills, for Pep Hamilton, for a new Texans offense. Should look new, both from a schematic standpoint and from a personnel standpoint, right? The changes in the offensive line, a couple of the draft picks. Don't know how soon Mechie will play, but you got Damian Pierce. So like the offense is gonna look different. That's gonna be one thing specific that we're looking at. I think going up against Indianapolis to start your season, that's a great test for your offense. A great a great way to me to sort of amateur evaluate and maybe too early reactionary evaluate what your offense looks like, right? And we'll do that in the preseason too, obviously. Yeah. But then you do it again with Denver. And again, Denver's defense, maybe I'm not sure if it's going to be as good as it was, let's say, a couple of years ago, but that's going to be interesting enough with the Russell Wilson thing, right? Like, so, put a plug in that. Your first road game, Russell Wilson's first home game in Denver, which you mentioned, that story will write itself. Chicago, okay, normally has a good defense. Not sure they're going to have a great defense this year, but this game stands out to me. First of all, I'm glad that the game is in Chicago before it gets too cold. It's in September. That's great. I think that's a good thing for the Texans. But also, think about this. It is, and I'm looking just to make sure again, it is the only game other than the obvious one, right? You play Jacksonville twice a year, right? That's a division opponent. So other than that obvious one, it's the only one where Davis Mills will have a head-to-head, presumably if Justin Fields is playing in that game. It's the only one where we'll have a head-to-head with a quarterback from his draft class. Unless something crazy happens between now and then, and one of those guys from last year ends up on one of these other teams, right? Like we're pretty sure that that's going to be the only matchup. And I think it's interesting comparing where Justin Fields was last year from a projection standpoint and where Davis Mills was last year from a projection standpoint to where they are now, right? The Bears went out of their way to trade up to go get him and paired him with a offensive coach who didn't seem to really know what to do with him, was kind of lame duck. Last year was really weird and unproductive for Justin Fields and the Chicago Bears at large. You make the same argument about the Texans because they ended up firing their offensive coordinator, firing their head coach, but feel a lot better about Davis Mills, though, right? Maybe he even performed in spite of some things. And maybe some of what helped him is what's still there in Pep Hamilton and elevating him as the offensive coordinator. I'm not saying it's going to be perfect, but the perception of these guys, I feel like, has changed a little bit, quite a bit, over the past year. And so I think that'll be an interesting sort of game within a game, story within a story. And obviously the Chargers are fascinating because of Justin Herbert, and they just they actually traded for Khalil Mack, right?
Yeah.
So
you got both. Well, let's see. You got Bosa and Mack.
Yeah.
You got Chubb and Gregory, and then you got Buckner and Ngakoue week 1. So I think you'll know very, very quickly where you've laid the most kind of wood, if you like, in terms of Titus, in terms of Laramie Tunsil, in terms of Kenyon Green. Are those guys, and I worry for Justin Britt. I do. I'm not convinced at all. But I think, I'd rather have Jimmy Morrison in there if you're going to see what's, for future years. But that's a part of the team.
Maybe that's a that's a training camp battle to watch, man.
Hope so.
Let's take a minute and watch that. I'm with you.
Yeah, and I think you'll find very quickly, have we got a structural flaw in the offensive line to defend your quarterback, and I think you'll have Lovie Smith going back there week 3 to a team he coached to a Super Bowl, and you'll have, as you said, a correct or an up-to-date temperature test of how the quarterbacks are pairing from the same draft class. Now, we had a temperature test as well from the network executives, still not warmed on the Texans football, albeit they did give 4 later kickoffs than we had in previous years. Only got the one primetime game, which everybody gets, the mandatory Thursday night one. But what they've actually done is maybe opened the door a little bit slightly. 2 later games at the 3:05 slate. We're going to have in Vegas, and then after the bye, and then we're going to host Tennessee before the week 9 slate on Thursday night football. So, and as well as week 2 against Russell Wilson. So we've got some later kickoffs. So we've not been destined to the midday Central Time purgatory that we were last year. So it feels like we've taken a small step forward, I think, and maybe that's been recognised by the schedule makers.
Maybe, yeah, a little bit. Or is that by circumstance? I mean, is that more about those opponents than it is
perhaps
than it is the Texans themselves? And we'll take it either way that we can get it, and I do think that this is a still, again, when I call it a wasteland, I think it's a fine year to not have a lot of national exposure to the team. I'm just not one that complains about that type of thing. Well, the national media is not talking about, to them, maybe it's not that interesting. Like, they're interested in the hot mess when it's a hot mess, right? When you've got sort of the issue that you need to untangle, but nationally, they're not necessarily trying to watch the entanglement of it all, right? So the goal is that, maybe not record-wise, but on tape and maybe through highlights and through moments, you have these moments that make people interested, that, that you do play well if you don't win that game. And I would expect you to win that game at home. But even if you don't win that Thursday night football game against Philadelphia, that, maybe Davis Mills has a big night, or maybe Derek Stingley and A.J. Brown are like this epic matchup on Thursday night football, or Dameon Pierce runs for 100 yards, or, the hope is, and then again, like you mentioned, some of these games are later, and then some of these games are ones that I think, even though not nationally televised, I think that the Cleveland and Dallas back-to-back is interesting, because I think there will be reasons to pay attention to that for surface level storylines, because you're like, okay, Deshaun Watson goes back, assuming that he's not suspended and that he's playing, and healthy. Deshaun Watson goes back to Houston. Okay, and so people will be interested in that. The very next week, it's Texans versus Dallas, or Houston versus Dallas, which I'm not as big of a Houston versus Dallas guy from being from Houston and having family from East Texas and all of that. Like that doesn't really do it for me as much, but it does it for everybody else, right? So that's going to be kind of a big deal, more so locally, but I think that the national media will probably take an opportunity to gravitate toward it a little bit, if for no other reason that it's the Cowboys are involved in their thing every week. So and then of course Kansas City's the week after that.
Well, that's got the potential, I think, to be, if we're on the ropes at that point and we're 6 or 7 games below 500, then that could be the knockout blow, that 3-week stretch, because you've obviously got, in reverse order, week 15 Kansas City at home, the trip up I-45 to Dallas, and then you've obviously got the return of Watson. Now, the week 13 one, obviously that was shunned by the networks. Obviously just want to give it a body swerve in terms of the optics, in terms of the storylines. They don't know where that will be, assuming it's post-suspension. But what do you think that game has got the potential to be like in the stadium that day? What do you think it's going to be like? Is it going to be vitriol, or is it going to be, a kind of classic pro? Because if this was a college game and it was a transfer, right? Is it going to be like that, do you think? Or is it going to be a bit more kind of country club kind of feel? Because I always think when you look around the stands at times, Brandon, or you see a lot of people that kind of comment outwardly on kind of platforms and stuff, a lot of these people aren't the ones that actually go to the games. If you actually look at the demographic in the stand, with the price of the tickets, with probably an older kind of demographic, if you like, probably less likely types that are going to drink 12 Bud Lights and scream something at number 4 on the other side. So there is a mix of those. But like I don't get the sense. I mean, I may be wrong, and it may be fire raining down from the 300 level. I don't know. But what do you think that day is going to be like? Because it's got the potential to be a blowout on paper in terms of their talent levels if they're rocking at that stage, depending on the suspension. But yeah, I've had different premonitions about that one of the return. I don't know if people want to store up their jerseys. I've got one with a tag on it. Maybe could throw it overboard onto the sideline for somebody to pick up. But I don't know which way it will go.
Yeah, I think it's got the potential to be ugly on a number of levels. Like, it'll be interesting to follow and watch the Deshaun Watson reception throughout the season leading up to that moment, because I think in some ways that'll inform a little bit of what you can expect, because you got to keep in mind, I feel like every time he goes on the road, there will be some sort of group. And it could be football fans and it could be non-football fans, right? People who don't even care about whatever game it is that particular day, that just don't want this dude in their city playing football, for the obvious reasons, for off the field and what's going on there. So like, I don't know. I'm not predicting protests, but I do think that that's at play, something that we got to consider. Like, there's a possibility that everywhere he goes, there will be a group that will protest the games. Now, in Houston, where like the scene of the alleged, I don't want to call it crime because he hasn't even been indicted for anything, but the scene of the alleged offenses that are brought up in these lawsuits, I think for a number of reasons, you'll have football fans that will resent Deshaun Watson for quitting on the team, forcing a trade not long after he signed an extension. As soon as things got the moment things got hard for the team, he basically decided that he didn't want to be a part of it. And that's an oversimplified way to describe it. But I think that's going to be the fan sentiment, the feeling, right? Like, never mind if he was validated in it and if he was right to feel that way and all of that. So I think it's going to be ugly. I think it's got potential to be ugly. I'm hoping it's just boos, but I think you're going to have to monitor the signs that are out there. There have been, and I'm actually here for this because I'm here for this level of petty, but there have been like discussions of if there should be like small towels passed around, if not, from the stadium, because maybe that would be a little too distasteful. But if somebody took it upon themselves to like make sure that there was a lot of towels, white, small towels to wave around, which I think would be petty and funny in a standpoint of, trying to make fun of Deshaun, but it also is a little distasteful for the person who said something bad happened to them, right?
Yeah.
So like, and so I don't want to. I would hate to get that confused of making fun of the wrong thing or making fun of the wrong person and intent to be confused. But I think it's got potential for all of that type of color and energy of, hey, we're gonna boo Deshaun, we're gonna make jokes about his sexual habits at the very least. We're gonna protest him for the allegations. Like I think you're gonna have a mix of discontent and resentment for Deshaun Watson, and then and just probably just outright dislike to some degree if you buy into the allegations.
Yeah.
And I think all of that's in play. I think you also have a small minority, because I've heard from these people who still believe in Deshaun Watson and wish he was still here.
Yeah.
So I think that you'll hear some cheers too, somewhere, but it'll be overwhelmed by people that are upset with him for a variety of reasons that I just described.
Yeah, I mean, I hope it. I hope they show the discontent and the fact that he turned his back on a city and a team that gave him everything. I hope that's clear at the very least. Look at him, he goes 21-0 up in the first 30 minutes of football or what have you. Then it's probably going to wane and people will take their frustrations out on the team or elsewhere, or they'll leave. But interesting point in the schedule now. I think you've got a real tough, as we said, start with the bye. And then coming out the bye, you've potentially got a run after that Philadelphia game on prime time, where you've got a trip to New York, you host the Washington football team or the Commanders, whatever the hell they call themselves now, and then you go to Miami. And I think any team in this league, Brandon, can win 5 or 6 games, and if the Texans are going to rack up wins that a lot of people hope, then I think probably with New York, Washington, Miami, Philly, Tennessee at home, I think that's the kind of stretch of games where you want to see them rack up wins, because as you said, you've got the 3 hardest games coming up, from 13 to 15, and then you finish off the season with 3 divisional opponents, which is the first time for a long time they've done that. So I think there's a key stretch in there that regardless how you get in and out the bye, if you're still building, still piecing this together, young guys learning, there's a stretch there from about week 9 to week 12 before that Deshaun game that the Texans can put some credibility, put some progress on their record, and hopefully by doing that they're developing players and getting. So I think that's the point there. I think that you see as hopefully be the kind of bit of the season where certainly it seemed like to be the most opportunity to go and develop and win games.
Yeah, so I think the only discrepancy here on how we view this is maybe like, what is Miami?
Well, that's it. Yeah.
I think that's a pertinent question, an interesting question, period, because Miami's got a new coach and trying to figure out what's going on with Tua, all of that. But as it pertains to the Texans, and hopefully by then we'll have a better sense for it, because that's later on in the season. But to me, that's the breakup or the possible line of demarcation, if you will, between the quote unquote winnable. I'm not going to call it an easy stretch for the Texans.
Yeah, winnable, yeah.
But the winnable stretch versus what my guy Lopez, when we were on Friday, I hosted with Lopez on Friday, and he called it, and I think he started with Miami like the stretch of death or something to that effect.
It's a tough spot, no doubt. Yeah,
these were the games, and it goes beyond, I think, what you have. He starts at Miami and goes Miami, Cleveland, Dallas, Kansas City, and Tennessee as the stretch of death. Okay, as the games that he doesn't feel like are all that winnable for the Texans. And I kind of, when he puts it that way, kind of side with him on that. Those are games that I'd be surprised if they won any of them. So back to the original point of Philadelphia, that NFC East, boy. All right, save for Dallas. That NFC East stretch, like you're hoping that you go at least 2-1. Get a winning record in those 3 games. Maybe win them all, but that to me would be the most disappointing part from a win-loss standpoint. That would be the most disappointing section of the schedule if they didn't win more than one of those games between Philly, and then you got the 10 days rest, I believe, before you play the Giants. Because the Philly game's Thursday night, so you get the extra rest before you go on the road and play the Giants. And you got Washington at home, led by the Washington. You said what do they call them?
Commander, the Washington Wentzes now. Yeah,
they're the fighting Carson Wentzes now, man. So if kind of hoping that you can beat the fighting Carson Wentzes, and the Daniel Jones, possibly Daniel Jones led or Tyrod Taylor led New York Giants,
Yeah.
Jalen Hurts coming home. Much love to Jalen Hurts. I got a lot of respect for Jalen Hurts, and don't think he's that great of a quarterback, but really want him to be when he's not playing the Texans, because he's a Houston area guy and represents. So that'll be a kind of a cool little homecoming thing, rooting for the hometown guy to lose that night.
Yeah.
But I would like to. You would hope as a Texans fan that Lovie Smith's defense, okay, if you want to have optimism, want to believe in Lovie Smith's defense, that they can have their best stretch possibly.
Yeah.
When they're playing back to back to back, presumably Jalen Hurts, Daniel Jones, and Carson Wentz on his third team in 3 years.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because Wentz tore us apart last year, and I think I heard a phrase of, if you can reduce the blowouts, that would be success this year. We can't rely on Jacksonville to prop up our win total, as we have done. Of those 4 wins, half of those have been Jacks for the last 2 years. So, there is a number of unknowns. I include Washington in that to a degree with that defense. You got to include the Bears to a degree. You got to include the Raiders to a degree. And I'm not quite sure what Tennessee will be this year, but a lot to be decided on this schedule.